Hello, and welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bolland, and I'm a congenital amputee of the right hand. In this show, I will interview other amputees and allow them to tell you their incredible life stories. I'll also feature family members of amputees and others who support the amputee community, all in an effort to discuss the challenges and triumphs of those living with limb loss. So stick around and listen to inspirational stories and find out why we say, we're not stumped. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bolland, and today I welcome Jakob Kepka. Jakob began having issues with his right knee in 1979, and in 1982 in the Marines, he suffered some workplace injuries. Some of those injuries led to repeated cortisone shots before Kepka's knee eventually broke down, and he underwent 6 knee replacements and revisions between 2001 and 2013. In 2014, Jakob made a difficult choice, not only about the future of his knee, but his future as a whole. We're going to get into that today on the decisions he made in 2014 and even more on today's episode of the We're Not Stumped podcast. But first of all, Jakob, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on your podcast and inviting me. Thanks.
Oh, it's my pleasure, because we're going to get into some of those things that you're doing that is extremely important. And I know it's starting literally in a couple of days. So for you to take the time means a lot to me. And we always start the podcast with a segment I call In Your Own Words. So I'd like the listeners to learn more about Jakob Kepka.
Okay. Right now I'm talking to you from Krakow, Poland, where I've been training for the last 2 months in preparation for this personal mission of mine to ride. I'm a paracyclist. I ride without a prosthetic on a conventional bike from Krakow, Poland to Kyiv for veterans and Ukrainians that have lost their limbs. That was the initial idea. It's grown since then, but that's where I'm at now. I'm here in a foundation's embassy. I've been living in the foundation for 2 months. These are people I worked with 2 years ago in Ukraine and Poland on the border when the war started. I came here 2 years ago as a volunteer and stayed for 6 months and lived 4 months in Ukraine as a one-legged construction worker, building, renovating old offices into a medical center. So my story, I'm a Canadian from Eastern Ontario, Canada. Born and raised on the St. Lawrence River. The United States was right across the river from me, northern New York State. I was, and everything was great growing up and living. I was a farm boy, country boy. And at no time did I ever think I'd be an amputee. And that was the thing. Like back then, you didn't see them. We had family friends that had become amputees due to snowmobile accidents and stuff like that. But then I don't remember ever seeing them again after they had the accidents. Wow. This is the 60s, eh? And so like life went on, and I played ball as a young man, and university football in Canada.
Wow.
I was a big lad, and then I wanted a military career. My parents were refugees from the Second World War. My father was a Polish soldier, and he served in the Polish army during the war, was incarcerated in a prisoner of war camp for 5.5 years. And my mother, who was a German, they met after the war. Her town was totally bombed by the Allies.
Wow.
But like I was my growing up, my father was a Polish patriot who could not return home because of the Stalinist regime that took over Poland. He probably would have not survived. So they immigrated to Canada, with nothing but the clothes on their back, like basically, with my older sister who had been born in Europe and started a life, you know, and built a new life over there. But the thing with my dad was he raised. We spoke Polish in the house, and he raised me to be a Polish patriot, regardless of the fact that I was born in Canada and hung out with Canadian kids and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was the odd kid in a little rural parochial school way out in the boonies in eastern Ontario. But as I grew older, I became more enthralled with the military stuff, because my father had been a soldier, and we were constantly surrounded by other immigrants from the Second World War, and all my dad's friends were, Polish soldiers. Some of them had fought in Italy. Some had jumped at Market Garden with the Americans. Others fought at Monte Cassino in Italy and came on into France and fought alongside Canadians and Americans. So, like, I was just, mesmerized by the military. So when I got in my early 20s, I enlisted in the Canadian Army as an officer candidate, but that's when we were downsizing the military. And I had been waiting a couple of years for my class to pick up. And I got fed up and I crossed the border. And with a very imaginative gunnery sergeant of the United States Marine Corps, I got in the Corps and shipped out to Paris Island.
Wow.
And this was like 2 years after that injury where I had the lateral meniscectomy and ACL repair. And I enlisted as an 0311, a rifleman. I went to Paris Island, graduated, went to Camp Lejeune. And as I say to most people, God gave me one gift, and it was the ability to shoot a rifle and hit a target.
Wow.
And the Marine Corps took notice of that. And they wanted me to go into a certain trade, and I wanted to be a sniper, a scout sniper school, go to scout sniper school. And I pushed myself really hard, and that weak knee started acting up, and not to be dropped from a potential class and that would go to the scout sniper school. I went to sick bay and listened to a Navy corpsman who said, well, we got this new drug, and it'll help you with your knee. And, like every time my knee acted up for the next 6 weeks to 2 months, I went in and saw him, and he injected me with this wonderful new drug called cortisone. But he didn't tell me that it eats away the cartilage, the soft tissue. So within a few months later, my knee was really bad. And I ended up in the Navy hospital having surgery, and they did a paddlectomy. They took my kneecap out. And my CO was, an old breed Marine, and he had come up the hard way, and he was a Korean and Vietnam vet. He served in Korea and Vietnam as a combat Marine. And his philosophy was, if you can't be a rifleman in my Marine Corps, you can't be in my Marine Corps. So I got honorably discharged, and I came eventually back to Canada, and then I returned to the United States, to California, where I lived for almost 5 years, growing grape. after the Marine Corps, that's when I couldn't run anymore. So
Hmm.
that's when I took up cycling.
Okay.
And in California, I was working in Sonoma Valley for a vineyard, and I rolled back and forth from work from my house in Sonoma. And then I got into longer distances where I was doing double centuries or whatever, organized rides in California, Northern California. And I fell in love with cycling, and I kept it up for years. I returned to Canada after 5 years to go to university again, and this time I was studying for the priesthood, and that didn't work out. But I got 3 years under my belt. I found out I didn't have a vocation, and the Archbishop wasn't happy that I got a woman pregnant either. So I was sort of asked to leave the seminary. And no problem. I got a wonderful son who lives in Paris, France, and he's going to join me on this thing I'm doing here in Poland.
Nice.
Uh, as time progressed, I rode, but by 1998, my knee had deteriorated so badly that riding was almost impossible.
Wow.
By 99, it was impossible. I had to give up riding. And in 2001, I had my first knee replacement, followed by 5 more. Then, because of what happened, the wound broke open. I got an infection. I became an AK.
Yeah,
Right.
I was going to ask you about that because depending on the articles I read, I wasn't sure if that was partly a decision on your part because of all the knee injuries you had, or as you said, I didn't realize this, you had an infection, so it was kind of maybe
Yeah.
some.
Well, the first thing that happened, my skin let go.
Oh boy.
They had used the same scar so many times that
Yeah.
when they stapled me up, the staples just let go
Wow.
in rehab. And then I kept bleeding for so long. They were trying to figure out what to do, and then all of a sudden, they thought they had caught had stopped the bleeding, but what had been happening was I was bleeding into my quadriceps,
Oh wow.
and
Terrible.
that's why my amputation ended up as high as it did. I got like 20 centimeters from my hip joint, which is pretty good actually, but it's not it's not the longest residual limb.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I was ready for my quality of life through those 13 years deteriorated.
Yeah.
Like not only did I have to give up cycling, I couldn't rock climb anymore. I couldn't, it was very difficult for me. I'm a fitness fanatic. And
Hmm.
then the fact that the pain was so bad, I was on opioids for pain management for so long,
Wow.
and that caused other problems. Like they
Sure.
not only like your liver and your kidneys and everything starts acting up, but no one really tells you that a side effect of opioids is mood changes and anger management issues.
Oh.
So I actually, after my fourth knee replacement, my surgeon and I at the hospital in Toronto came to words. He didn't exchange because I told him to amputate then.
Okay.
I wanted my life back. And I believed my leg was holding me back.
Well, it sure seems like that was the right decision based on everything you've been able to accomplish since then.
Yeah, like I tell people now that having my amputation gave me a new life,
Wow.
and it gave me an opportunity to do things and have experiences and meet people that I would have never met or even thought of doing as an able-bodied person.
Sure.
Uh, uh, the one ironic thing when I became an amputee was I remembered that in 1994 I went to Bosnia on as a humanitarian volunteer during the war, and I ended up living with a family in Mostar, and the husband was right leg above knee amputee.
Wow.
And I helped him, Nazir, right? He was very depressed. He was hooked on fishing in the river that runs through Mostar. I carried his fishing tackle. He couldn't wear a prosthetic because he got one from Italy, made for him, and it hurt him so much. And he lived on crutches. But at that time, I had a gimpy leg, but you don't think that eventually you're going to lose your leg, right? But
yeah.
When I was laying in the hospital after my amputation, I thought about him a lot. How he was unable to cope. He took up drinking and he smoked like a bloody chimney, but it was Bosnia in the early 90s. Everybody smoked. It was a war. It was a stress relief. But just how it affected his family. He had a wife with 2 little girls, another one on the way, which unfortunately passed at birth because she had spina bifida.
Oh, it's terrible.
But it just the whole thing, eh? So now I'm an amp, and the circumstances around my amputation, I was in a rehab hospital in Toronto that I always went to after my knee replacements. So they knew me as a non-compliant, overachieving patient. And in the MSK ward, the musculoskeletal ward, they warned the amputee ward when I got transferred. I was discharged for a day from that rehab hospital, sent to my surgeon's hospital, Mount Sinai in Toronto, had my amputation, and was back in the rehab hospital in the amputee ward within 36 hours of leaving.
That's quick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it happened to be on a long weekend in 2014 in February in Canada, in Ontario. And I had a stand-in physio who knew me. She was a part-timer. She worked in all the different gyms. And she brought me a wheelchair, and I told her I'm not going to use it. And she goes, well, how are you going to go to the bathroom? And I said, you either give me crutches or I'm going to hop. Well, you can't do that. I said, well, I'm not using a wheelchair because I've seen other people use wheelchairs and not get out of them.
Yeah.
So I refused a wheelchair. They gave me a walker and then later crutches. And that's how I started my journey as an amputee, non-compliant and overachieving. And it only got worse. And my physios and, physio assistants, weren't happy with me some days. But I would spend 6 hours in the gym because they would tell me stuff like, I was fit, but, they say, well, you have to work, you're an AK, you got to work on your core. So I'd be doing core exercises like crazy. I'd be on, keeping my aerobic and anaerobic conditioning up, all waiting for the day I got my first leg, doing balancing tests, all the little balancing stuff, stretching and tying 50 pounds to my stump to stretch my hip flexors so I could walk well. They didn't like that idea. I only did that once I got the staples out. So I got my leg, and I worked hard at walking properly. Then I have a Genium X3, and I was awarded that. So, over the years, and I started out with a socket, and because of my activity level, in the first 5 years, I think I went through 20 sockets, trying to find a system that worked for my lifestyle. Because I was determined to be very active again. While I was in the hospital, they come into your room and a physiatrist says, well, what are your goals as an amputee? And everybody has their goals. And mine was to ride a bike again, though I didn't know how I would do it, and to walk well enough wearing trousers that people wouldn't know I'm an amputee. That's the beginning of my journey as an amputee. I had problems with sockets.
Yeah.
I was determined to ride a bike again.
I'm just curious what they say about your desire to ride a bike again. Were they positive? Were they apprehensive?
Oh yeah, like the physiatrist that I got in the hospital. He was on he was the physiatrist for the Canadian Paralympic team.
There you go. Okay.
And in that way, he was very supportive. My first prostitution from the hospital, he was too, because he had a bunch of guys. They were BKs, but they were on the Canadian Paralympic team for different sports, right? But they were baloney guys. They never had a cyclist, though. These were all guys that were doing other stuff, right? Like sit volleyball, wheelchair basketball. The really fit baloney guys could play basketball wearing a prosthetic and probably outdo two-legged players, like, normies, as I call them. And yeah, they cheat at everything. But like if you're going to compete in the Paralympics or in basketball as an amputee, it's wheelchair basketball. That's the only option. So I had no idea how I was going to ride a bike. I was really frustrated with the sockets, my socket problems. Then one day, I was living outside of Toronto in Oshawa, Ontario, the GM capital of Canada. And I had a very good friend there, and he would take me to bike shops just so I could look at bicycles. That's eye candy for me. And it was right after the London Olympics, about a year after. And I went into a bike shop, a high-end bike shop for road bikes. And the guy had, he's letting me browse and touch and drool. And he had a bunch of old European cycling magazines. And one of them was from around the London Olympics. And in it was an article about an amputee cycling team in Barcelona. And he gave me the magazine. I read the article. And I had a trip planned to see my son in France that year. I was going to stay in France for 6 months, come to Poland for the first time, and visit family in Germany. So I came to Europe, and when I was in France, I called the cycling team in Barcelona and talked to them, and through Google Translate, and said, when I'm done in Poland, I'll swing by and talk to you people and see how you ride. So what happened was I swung by in those, in my little tour of Europe. And they were very receptive. I saw how they rode, and all the AKs rode without a prosthetic, with a cycling socket attached to the seat post. So I figured, okay, this is the way you do it. So this is the way I'm going to do it. And I went back to Canada, and I didn't have a bike. And somebody told me about the Challenge Athletes Foundation. So I applied to the CAF, and then I found out about Operation Rebound in the CAF, which is for veterans, which ups the amount of money you can possibly be given as a veteran. And my application was accepted. They asked what I needed. I said a bicycle. And it was through the Challenge Athletes Foundation, Operation Rebound, and its director, Nico Marcolongo, who happens to be another Marine. We stick together, you know. I got my first bike, and my prostitution now in Whitby, Ontario. He designed my first cycling socket for no charge.
That's great.
He made a carbon like Kieran Bliss, my prostitution. I've come to him with some ideas, you know, for activities and that. And Kieran's never, or sockets, when I was wearing a socket, he's never said, we can't.
Yeah.
He's always said, Jake, you're a real pain in my derriere, but together we'll figure it out.
I love that attitude. You know, the reason why I asked the question is because I do a segment on Thursdays that comes out, and it's called Headlines. And I read a headline from another cyclist, to another Bubney cyclist. And originally when he was going through his, and I can only go through, I can only judge based off of the quotes and what was in the article, but gentleman in California, and his doctor originally said, you know, what would you like to do after your amputation? And he said, I want to ride a bike. And the doctor said, well, that's off the table. And I'm like, wow. In my opinion, I think at that point you should be you should be looking for someone else.
Yeah. Well, right there, if that would have been my doctor, I would have said, really? Do you think so?
Yeah.
I'll see you in a few months.
Yeah. And that was his attitude too. He ended up doing it. So I'm glad he was able to do it. But I also think that you need to be on the same page with the people that you're, because it sounds like you are. I mean, the people say, we'll figure it out. And that's a great way to be.
I've been really blessed in the people in the amputee world that have come into my life. I wanted to live my life to the fullest. And with my leg, I couldn't do that, but as an amputee, I can. And people get confused by that. And I tell them that probably next to being a Marine and the birth of my son, becoming an amputee is the greatest gift I've received in my life.
Wow, that's a fantastic way of looking at it. You have the right attitude for sure. And I like how you say, hey, that's not how I'm going to live. You know, I'm not going to be one sitting around and having people do things for me. I think that's an extremely positive outlook that you have. And when you talk about positive things about you, I know you're getting ready literally in a couple days, or a few days at least, for Hoperaising Expedition, which is a 900-kilometer bike ride from Krakow, if I'm saying it correctly, in Poland to Kyiv,
Krakow,
Ukraine.
Yeah.
Krakow.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, it's like I said, I came here. I was still wearing a socket at the beginning of the war, May 2 years ago, 2022. I volunteered with a group that took American veterans. They brought us over, and I linked up with, they partnered with a Polish humanitarian aid group that just sprung up when the war started, because they happened to be on the border. People were lining up, hungry, cold, and needed to get out of Ukraine. So these group of people that were had the logistical knowledge, because they were they ran folk festivals in that part of Poland. So they had the trucks, they had the connections in towns, they knew everything. But what they at first did was just make soup and sandwiches, went to the border and handed it out. Then they started bringing people over. And then they got a warehouse and delivering humanitarian aid. And this happened within like 3 months of the war. All this, like this transition. And this organization, I was linked with it. And that's how I met the people that are now the founders of Freedom Space Foundation here in Krakow, which is Krakow has 200,000 Ukrainian refugees here, mostly women and children, because the men couldn't get out. So these displaced people are here in Krakow, Poland, living in refugee centers or apartments, and some of them are working, a lot aren't. You have people with disabilities that are stuck here from
Yeah.
Ukraine.
Wow.
Um,
Yep.
and so when I was on the border working, because I worked in construction before my leg got really bad, the Polish organization and the American Veterans Group that brought us over um, decided to create what they called a handyman team. So, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
I was on that team. Because I speak Polish, I was the head guy. And we did a project in Poland in the warehouse, some building, but then we were asked by a hospital just over the border in Ukraine, in the Lviv Oblast, to have a look consider renovating old offices that hadn't been used for 25, 30 years and make a new medical center. So four of us moved over, lived in the school on knackered cots, and began the project.
Wow.
We with Ukrainian volunteers, and I stayed the longest. I stayed 4 months till they dug the well for the clinic, because that was my last, obligation. I knew the clinic would open if they had a well, because if you don't have a well, um, you can't have a clinic without water, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to realize that Ukrainian towns, this town of 3,500 had no infrastructure. Everybody was still on wells. All the streets were unpaved. We were getting daily, sirens going off, but this little town had nowhere to go. The only bomb
Wow.
shelter was at the school. So you just kept on working, and it's Western Ukraine. You don't really pay attention anymore. And what happened was my son came to work with us. He's a carpenter in France. So Joachim came for a week to work with his dad and the other guys, and he wanted to go to Lviv for the weekend when we had the weekend off. So we all, went to Lviv. It's very inexpensive to rent hotels and eat meals. Like, you wouldn't believe how cheap it is living in the States or Canada. And he was out doing his thing. Actually, he was out getting a tattoo, which would have cost him in Canada, like $3,000, and he got it
Wow.
for 500 American.
Wow.
And I was walking around the old town, where our hotel was, in the main square, the great square of Lviv. And I'm wearing shorts. It's summer. I got my X3 on, and I'm, debopping along. And there's a young man coming towards me who's a new AK on crutches between his mom and dad. And he was all of maybe 20. And I get choked up
Yeah.
sharing this.
Yeah.
Uh, so he sees me walking, and I'm walking pretty good, even with my socket. And he sees my leg, my X3, and the microprocessor, it's top of the line, and he's staring at it, and then we have eye contact. And the way I describe it here in Polish is, his eyes, were like bottomless black wells. There was no hope. There was just despair in his face, because maybe he might have come from one of those small towns with no infrastructure. Lviv is a military liberty town, but it's also full of prosthetic clinics, superhumans, and I forget the other one's name. I'll be visiting them. I better remember it before I get there. And and a lot of hospitals, army hospitals, right? Because it's relatively safe city. So he was probably on leave, and I knew he was new because you could his folded up trousers had blood on them.
Oh, wow.
You could see
Yes.
blood, right?
Yes. Yes.
And our eyes met, and I walked by him, and I didn't stop. And the shame I felt, and the sense of failure I felt for not doing that, ate at me. That night in the hotel room, I couldn't sleep. Just I saw him in my, when I closed my eyes. And that's when this idea of the hope raising, it didn't have a name then, hope raising expedition came up. At first I was going to, as a long distance paracyclist, I was going to ride across Canada. I don't know if you've heard of Terry Fox.
I have not.
He was a young man, above knee amputee in the late 70s. He was 19. He lost his leg to cancer. He decided to run across Canada, and he made it halfway before the cancer came back. And he passed away. But the Terry Fox Foundation exists to this day. It was called the Marathon of Hope. He ran a marathon every day on a leg from the 1970s.
And this is Terry Fox, you said?
Yeah.
I'm going to look that up. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, we got statues across Canada for him. We have a Terry Fox run the second Sunday of every September.
I can't believe I haven't heard of that. Thank you for passing that over.
His foundation has raised tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars since that he passed for cancer research.
Well, that's a great cause.
And he was just a young man. He was running from St. John's to Victoria, his hometown, or Vancouver, I forget which. And I thought I'd do that. Okay, I'll get on a bike, dip my big toe in left big toe in the Atlantic, jump on a bike, go across the Rock, Newfoundland, take a ferry to Nova Scotia or Labrador, and just ride across the country and fundraise for Ukrainian amputees for prosthetics. And but then I thought, well, what's the point of that? Ukrainian amputees will never know about it. They might, see a box of prosthetics, thanks to whatever the name of that ride would have been. Here are these prosthetics, but I wouldn't have been able to do what I wanted to do for that young man by riding across Canada. I wouldn't have been able to instill hope.
Yep.
Riding across Canada. And then I thought, oh, well, I'm a Polish citizen now. I have all these foundation friends, family now from the previous foundation, founded a new foundation in Krakow, still working with Ukrainians, still making runs to hospitals in Ukraine and orphanages. Why don't I ride from there to Kyiv, and stop off and visit with limb loss victims in Ukraine? That idea sort of percolated, and I called my son and I go, Joachim, I have this idea. What do you think? And he goes, Dad, it's stupid and it's crazy, but if you're going to do it anyways, and if you don't do it, you'll hate yourself even more than you did when you didn't help that young man.
Yes, that's a great point.
And then I called one of my Polish family here, from the foundation. I call him my brother from a different mother, and I go, Valdi, I got this idea. And he goes, my Polish nickname is Kuba. He goes, Kuba, it's crazy, but I like it. We'll get on board. So that's how Freedom Space came on. Then I had run into Anna from Penta while I was in Poland 2 years ago. Well, they actually pulled me out of Ukraine to visit with her because she visited the original foundation and they were shipping prosthetics into Ukraine for Penta prosthetics from the
Yes.
United States.
Great organization. Yes.
Yeah, so Anna wanted to meet the one-legged guy doing construction work, who's a Polish Canadian guy. And we talked, and when I got home, I collected 16 large boxes of old prosthetics from clinics, including, by this time, I had osseointegration. When I returned to Canada, I got my call to have osteo done in Montreal. So I had that done. I couldn't run. I was told I can't run. So I gave my running blade away and its knee. And I don't care if Autobach knows. I had my original X3 in a closet. And I wasn't allowed to wear it because it had no warranty. I had a new one by this time. So that went to Ukraine. Along with 16 boxes of other stuff. Upper extremity, children's prosthetics. These clinics, because of COVID, had all store stuff. No one collected for 2 years. And helped me get it into the United States, and then they used it. I asked a lot of it be sent to Ukraine. So then when the idea was coming to life about the ride, I reached out to Penta. They said, we'd like to help you out. I found Victoria Hand Project, a Canadian NGO that does 3D upper extremity prosthetics from Victoria, BC. And they're partnered up with several clinics in Ukraine running programs. And they were on board. But, it was right after COVID. Things are tough, and their financial they couldn't financially commit to supporting the ride, but they could logistically commit in that they would introduce, once I got here, me to clinics and hospitals that they worked with so I could visit.
Well, that's fantastic. And I want to read a quote that I read about your Hoperaising Expedition. As he pedals through the war-torn terrain, Jakob becomes a beacon of hope for those who have suffered similar injuries, showcasing the resilience and determination of the human spirit in the face of adversity. And where can people go to find your donation page?
The original page is being shut down, and my friends here have done an excellent job with social media.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a Polish page, but it's in 3 languages because it goes also into Ukraine, the postings. So it's called Jakob Kepka, Jakob. I spell my name differently. Kepka, Kepka dash Hoperaising, capital HOPE, capital RAISING Expedition on Facebook. And very soon, since we're shutting down the original donor page and rebooting or whatever you call it, because we had money donated in Canada, individuals that were handling it pulled out because they overcommitted themselves to another project, a demining project in Ukraine, and they did that while I was here.
Oh, wow.
So that happened in limbo. And then here, between Freedom Space getting on board and getting me to this stage, they introduced me to another Krakow foundation called, I'll say it in English, Foundation for Heroes Krakow, which is an advocacy founded by a blind Pole, Thomas, and their goal is accessibility and education of the general public on what it's like to live with a disability, any disability,
Mm-hmm.
and to look upon us as people first. Don't identify us by our disability, but look at us as people first.
Yeah,
So,
that's great.
so what happened when these two Polish groups got together? And we're planning, and I'm over here training. I've been training for 2 years, like constantly, 2.5 now. Last year I did 14,000 kilometers on the bicycle. Wow. Now we've got a route, and you'll find that on the Facebook page. We've got stops. I've met with the president, like the way Krakow is set up. We've got the patronage of Krakow. We got the patronage of the Ukrainian consulate here in Krakow. The mayor, or they call him the president of Krakow, because he's also the head of the province of Krakow around the city, has contacted the mayor of Lviv, and all the cities we're stopping on our route, all the Kyiv. We're having the ride starts Sunday. Tomorrow night we have a conference at a sports a community sports center here. That's also an integration center for people with disabilities into sports with able-bodied people. So we're having a conference. One of the vice presidents of Krakow is going to be there. The consul general from the Ukrainian consulate will be there. Para-athletes, wheelchair basketball, because that's the main focus of Heroes for Krakow. They support and train a wheelchair basketball team that's won championships in Poland. And then on Sunday, thanks to the petitioning of both foundations that are supporting me here, Freedom Space and For Heroes, the city has opened up the Great Square for the kickoff of the ride, where we'll kick off the ride with a short prologue to a suburb where I'm living in, to a lake on Sunday afternoon, and where we're going to have disability awareness and education exhibition, a concert, food. And when I'm riding it's about a half-hour ride only, from the Great Square to this suburb called Nova Huta, to the lake in the middle of Nova Huta, I'm going to be accompanied by hand cyclists, able-bodied cyclists, hopefully kids, the elderly, and visibly visibility impaired cyclists on tandems, and a bunch of people are stopping me on the road saying, "How can we join you on your ride?"
And you're saying it starts this Sunday, which is only a couple days away. And I know you have meetings coming up and quite a bit of other things. So I want to give you your time back.
The one thing I want to say is about Ukraine. Like, we're going into Ukraine. Here in Poland, it's about integration, accessibility, because in North America, we're not 100% accessible. Poland is about 10 years behind us. Ukraine, with an influx of up to between 60 to 100,000 new since the war began, amputees, a country that only had 200 prosthetic clinicians and technicians at the time of war. They're swamped. And we're not even taking into account people with spinal cord injuries, people that have become deaf or blind because of the war, or the psychological effects of the war.
Well, what you're doing is so important. I urge everyone to go to that fundraising page and look up.
Please.
And I want to end it on this, because I read something on your other donation page from someone named Blanca, and I really like this quote: "The true definition of selfless service," and she's talking about you, "be safe and enjoy the ride. to your destination. So, Jakob, thank you so much for being a guest on the We're Not Stumped podcast. Good luck and congratulations, and for everything you're doing. You're doing a lot of great things. Thank you.
Thank you. And well, thank you for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely.
And I ask your listeners just to follow the ride and keep us all in your prayers, because Ukrainian drivers frighten me terribly.
Yes, you'll be in my thoughts for sure there. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Stumped podcast, hosted by Mike Bolland. If you want to be a guest on the program, reach out to Mike at his email address, mike@mikebolland.com. This podcast is produced by One Hand Man Productions. If you are looking to start your podcast, go to onehandmanproductions.com.